I couldn't help but smirk as I watched the pep in Lucrute's walk as we both headed to the restaurant that he had recommended. It helped numb what I'd been feeling earlier. At this time of day, most people would be tired from a long day of hard work, especially if they fought off a horde of goblins and ogres. "What makes you so different?" I mused aloud. "What can I say, Kasha? A beautiful goddess of a woman has accepted my proposition for a dinner. I would have to be an unfeeling undead to not be excited like I am now." Lucrute replied with sincerity, "Not that he's completely wrong. You are a goddess." In a way, I could understand his feelings quite perfectly. Back on Earth, I would jump for joy when a girl accepted my invitation to a date. Sadly, I was never able to make a relationship come out of any of those dates. "Mind telling me about how you even found out about this restaurant? It would be a nice story to pass the time while we walk there," I asked Lucrute with some interest. I was betting on the reason behind this place being due to Lucrute bringing all his dates to the place. The blonde chuckled at my question and spoke, "Well, like Diane and Nina, I wasn't born in Erantle. I came from a small village called Signpass. Not much of an inspired name since we were based on a crossroad leading to Erantle, Pespel, and some small villages. We were essentially a rest stop for travelers. Trust me, Signpass isn't the worst name I've heard for a town. There have been much worse, but go on," I remarked. "Still, since we got so many travelers coming to and from the town, my cousin, Celica, was inspired to go to Erantle to start a living. She had managed to save up enough money to travel there, buy a cheap building, and turned it into a restaurant. When I eventually came to Erantle, I rented a room from her for a pretty cheap price until I could get onto my feet with an adventuring career." Lucrute finished. "Sounds like your cousin has done pretty well for herself. You probably get a discount from there, I'm guessing." "Yeah, I do. But I still pay the full price if I can every time. Celica has helped me a lot in my earlier days, so I try to help her out as much as I can. Also helps that some of the girls working at her place are pretty cute," Lucrute quickly added in a panicked tone, "not that they have anything on you. Of course, you'd enjoy an establishment that employs attractive women," I remarked with amusement. The blonde was a creature of habit, not exactly something that I didn't expect. Even with his endless fascination with the opposite gender, I didn't find it that off-putting. "Yeah, I am average in that regard. But you aren't. Mind telling me more about your life besides what you told us earlier today? Being a noble must have been much different than living like a commoner." I thought about this for a moment. Making up a backstory for myself on the spot was a little difficult since I had never lived like a noble in my life on Earth. Though, modern amenities would seem like something kings would have. Time to ad-lib a backstory at the last minute. My homeland was a place full of magic and wonder. We had tall towers of metal, stone, and glass that seemed to touch the sky. My mother, Inori, was a queen of our land. She was kind, beautiful, though she did have a prankster streak. She supported the common people by giving them technology, food, and as much help as possible. "Wow, your mother is much different than our nobles. The only noble that I know of who has helped the common people would be Princess Renna, and even she has issues with trying to do that because the other nobles try and hinder her attempts," Lucrute said, impressed. "Our only nobles were my mother, my father, and my sisters, and people like mayors were elected by the commoners, and they would come to my mother with their requests which she would help with if she could. Beyond that, I grew up being taught by my mother on a myriad of subjects, with training in the ways of magic taking a greater importance than everything else. To be honest, part of this backstory that I was making up was coming from a mix of the government from my home on Earth, and random fantasy tropes. My family has the trait of birthing very powerful magic users, so learning how to cast spells was a big must. After getting old enough, I gained a wanderlust to travel from home and explore the world, so I made my preparations, said my goodbyes, and left. I finished up the rest of my impromptu backstory quickly as I could since I didn't want any potential backstory to have holes in it that someone would notice. Lucrute thought on what I said before speaking up. Did you see interesting sights on your travels? Now that was much easier to answer on the spot. I've had so much experience during my adventures in Yggdrasil that I could choose any one of the hundreds of experiences I've had. You'll have to be a little more specific, Lucrute. I've seen a lot of strange things during my travels, which makes it hard to pick one specifically. What about something that you could say was the most memorable? Something memorable? That is slightly easier to choose, as I had a few moments that would forever stick with me during my time in Yggdrasil. During my earlier training, before I started traveling, I remember the day that I first used magic. I was completely captivated by the way a simple and weak fireball spell crackled in my palm. And it's true. When I first activated a spell in Yggdrasil, I had been transfixed on how realistic looking the fire in my hand looked. I'm pretty sure that most players were like this when they first started playing the game. It was a miracle of technology to be able to make the fantastical aspects of Yggdrasil feel so realistic to the players. There were stories of Yggdrasil players dying in real life because they never left the game and their bodies starved. Then again, I can't really blame them with the state that the world is in. Abandoning the shitty aspects of the real world for the amazing world of adventure that was Yggdrasil was an extremely tempting choice. What I decided to leave out of my answer to Lucrute was the fact that I had been so transfixed by my first spell that the weak, low-level monster that I'd been fighting managed to kill me. That was extremely embarrassing. Using my first spell made me completely throw myself into my magic studies, which is how I ended up so powerful. I enhanced my answer by making a small fireball grow to life in my hand. Lucrute's eyes were drawn to this mystical display, like a moth to the flame, until I crushed my hand into a fist, snuffing the fire out. Lucrute looked back at my face and grinned. I remember the first time I saw a mage cast their spells in battle. It was during my earlier guild days when I was pretty green. While the mage himself was unpleasing to the eye, compared to yourself, I stood and watched the mage summon a small troop of animals that completely decimated the monsters we were fighting. Why didn't that make you want to learn how to use magic if it was so awesome to you? Lucrute's smile slightly faltered as he glanced away, and he rubbed the back of his head. He then answered, I wanted to learn, and I even asked the mage to train me. The guy looked at me, and immediately answered that I would never have the potential to learn magic, as it would take many years for me to even learn a single first-tier spell. It was humbling to say the least. Oh. I replied with a small sense of shame at the way I had obviously brought up a topic that Lucrute was unhappy about. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk about something that upsets you. The blonde archer looked to me with a grin and a shake of his head. It's fine, Kasha. You didn't know, and I've accepted my limits even if I don't like it. And besides, with all the training I've done in archery, I'm able to take down enemies faster than a regular mage can finish getting a spell off. I'm also not hindered by a mana limit, only the number of arrows and weapons I have on me at the time. Lucrute answered in pride. I couldn't help but smile at the upbeat tone that Lucrute exuded. It was almost enough to make me forget about everything upsetting that happened today. I really hoped that I could shrug off what upset me the same way that Lucrute had. Enough about me though, mind telling me what your cousin is like? From what you said, it seems like the two of you are quite close to one another. Lucrute put a hand under his chin in thought before answering. The first thing I can think of when talking about Selly is kindness. She's like the older sister that I've never had, and when my mom died, she was there to help take care of my siblings, and Selly raised me well, and she even taught me how to read. This tidbit of information made me raise my eyebrow in surprise. While I knew that Lucrute had learned to read since it was a requirement to even join the Adventurers Guild, I didn't expect that he'd learned while still at home. He was very lucky to have a family member that could read and teach him. You mind answering how Celica learned to read? I was partially under the assumption that most farmers didn't have the tools and teachers to normally read. Good question. Actually, in my small village we only had 3 people that had learned to read. One was the town's chief, who needed to read in order to communicate with the nobles when they sent their messages. The next was Relia, the innkeeper, as well as my aunt, and she learned to read because it was extremely helpful for her job. Selly was taught to read by Relia, her mother. Makes sense. Does Re-Estais have multiple places to receive education, or is it relegated to specific people and jobs? The only places I know that you could go to learn in the kingdom would be the capital. While I know that there are some places in the different cities that can educate you, I have no idea where they might be located. Villages and towns outside the city have it worse, as the only way that you can get an education is if you know someone who can teach you. Lucrute answered. I was expecting to learn something like this for a while. In a society that was still stuck in the medieval ages, even with magic included, education wouldn't have as large of a focus compared to survival. Farmers and the like wouldn't have the time to be taught how to read, since they needed to care for their crops and animals. That gave me the idea to eventually add some sort of school to the settlement when it was more self-sufficient and had a bigger population. Having an educated populace would always be beneficial to society overall than if they were left without a clue about the world. I instinctually felt that an uneducated populace was wrong. Leaving my future plans for another time, I said, your cousin is a wise person to have taught you how to read. She really is. And you might get to meet her soon because we've arrived at her restaurant, Lucrute said excitedly. The building that we were heading towards had a cozy look to it, from the wooden paneling on the front, to the way that warm light streamed from the windows. The front door had people continually coming and going. Seems quite popular. Wonder how we'll get a seat? I pondered aloud. No need to worry about that. While her place gets busy during the night, she tends to save me a table for when I come by with company. I gave the blonde a sly look at his answer. He was really playing up the Casanova persona of his tonight. I just hope that his wallet is big enough to handle my appetite. The moment we stepped into the restaurant, my nose was assaulted by a myriad of smells that almost overwhelmed my senses. The only reason that I was able to alleviate this sensory overload was by focusing on my own scent and breathing through my mouth. Thankfully, Lucrute didn't notice my moment weakness as I recovered before he spoke to me. I can see our table, follow me, Kasha. The blonde said before he started maneuvering through the crowd with me following after him. While we moved through the crowd, a few of the braver patrons tried to grope me. They would quickly regret this as my invisible tail smacked them in retaliation. Assholes. I muttered under my breath before joining Lucrute at a booth in the corner with a paper name tag Lucky written on it. Glancing at Lucrute, the blonde took notice of me staring at the name tag before grabbing it from the table and pocketing it with reddened cheeks. Mind telling me what that was about? I asked while taking a seat at the booth. It's a little bit of an embarrassing nickname that Selly has for me. She started calling me that after a strange childhood experience that we shared. I raised a question eyebrow but remained silent. Everyone was allowed to have their own secrets. It's so cute that you still get embarrassed about that, Lucky. A female voice interjected as a pretty woman with dirty blonde hair and green eyes walked over to Lucrute and wrapped an arm around his shoulder. I didn't think that it was that bad. Selly, come on, I'm trying to look good in front of Kasha. Lucrute whined, causing Celica and I to chuckle at the blonde's discomfort. After both of us calmed down, Celica quickly scanned me with her eyes before she seemed satisfied. She's quite the looker, Lucky. You are really living up to your name if you managed to get a date with her. She then held out her hand to me, which I shook. Her hand was quite rough, the sign of a person who's done hard work for much of their life. It made me respect her as, in my previous life, the people who worked the hardest were also usually the most honest. My name's Celica Vulve, who might you be? Kasha Blanc, a traveling adventurer and, as of recently, part of Lucrute's adventuring team. I replied. Celica smirked before looking back at Lucrute. I've heard some talk of you from some of the town guards that come in here. Apparently, you did a number on the undead in the graveyards. Lucky, make sure not to get on her bad side, else you're going to have a bad time. With that said, Celica removed her hand from Lucrute's shoulder and asked, Now, we serve beef, stew, and fish. Drinks are whiskey, ale, water, and wine. What would you like? The usual. Lucrute answered, "I'm up for beef and ale." I replied. Celica nodded with a smile, and I noticed that she didn't even write our orders down on a notepad. If she was able to memorize our orders, then that meant she was a step ahead of the waiters back home. "I'll bring your drinks up first. Food should be available in a few minutes." With that, she walked off and left Lucrute and I to ourselves. The blonde archer was the first to speak up. "Ale, huh? That your favorite drink, or do you prefer something else?" "Trust me, I have a very wide palate for alcohol. Personally, I found my preference to be for tequila, vodka, and rum. But I'm not one to pass up the odd beer every once in a while. Wines haven't always been to my taste, usually since they seem too soft in taste compared to other alcohols." After saying this, Lucrute maintained a confused expression at everything that I said. "I've never heard of tequila and vodka before. Are those drinks that hail from your home?" Resting my chin on my hands, I recalled what I knew about alcohol, which was considerable since drinking was one way to alleviate the shithole that Earth was. To explain it easily enough, vodka is distilled from plants containing starch or a high sugar content. It usually lacks flavor of normal alcohols, but it's great to mix other drinks with. Tequila is a drink that is distilled only from the blue agave plant. Back home, the blue agave plant was one of the few exports that came from Mexico, as well as one of the species of plants we hadn't eradicated yet, which gave the drink a unique flavor. Sounds good. I wish that you could have brought some of those drinks over so I could try them. Your land must have been very creative if they could make even more types of alcohol than what we have here," Lucrute remarked in interest. "To be honest, I could probably recreate some of the alcohols from my world with my alchemist class. Potentially, I'd be able to corner the entire drinking industry in the world with my scientific knowledge from my world and the abilities I have from Yggdrasil. Maybe I could make alcohol an export from the Goblin settlement. The land I came from was quite advanced, and since a lot of our survival needs were cared for, we were able to focus more on creative and scientific disciplines that less automated civilizations lacked the time for. It's slightly why I'm disappointed with this country's lack of education," I explained. While I had been busy explaining aspects of Earth, Celica had already brought us our drinks. "Mind explaining what disappoints you about Re-Estize's education? I've rarely heard of adventurers speak about it." Celica interjected in interest. Picking up my tankard of ale and taking a large gulp from it, I answered, "When a society has education hard to find for its citizens, that causes the society to have slow scientific and technological advances. Back home, our advances came from the focus we had on educating our citizens, with mandatory schooling for children." "Really? I've never heard of an idea being implemented anywhere in the Re-Estize kingdom, though I'm unsure about the other countries around us, but I'd guess they might be similar to us," Celica said in interest. "From what I've learned, education isn't widely given in countries with class systems. The nobles would rather have the populace remain uneducated and ignorant than knowledgeable and filled with ideas. It's a method of control. I made this assumption from what I've learned of history. Organizations like the Catholic Church tried to quell the sciences in order to remain in power during feudal eras." Lucrute sipped on his drink before speaking. I'd be careful of speaking about the nobles very loudly. While Celi and I aren't bothered by it, Lucrute cautiously glanced around us before finishing. "Some people are, and they talk. So, the nobles are very petty and suppress criticisms made against them." That was slightly troubling. It didn't worry me if they tried to attack me, as I could easily obliterate any attackers, but if I did gain their ire, then it would be harder to make connections and those I interact with could be hurt. "Have you had issues with the pompous twits?" I asked, keeping references to the nobles at a minimum. Lucrute followed what I was saying with a short chuckle before answering, "Until a few years ago, slavery was legal in the Re-Estize. Doesn't mean that the twits have completely stopped it, as there is enough talk and proof to show that it's still a large business." I could feel my grip tighten, and I didn't doubt that if I wasn't wearing gloves, then I'd be able to see my knuckles turning white. "Slavery is still a practice here. How could people here be so barbaric? This anger I felt was primal. The act of taking someone's freedom by such a process as slavery pushed upon me instinctually. Those who treat sentient beings as nothing more than objects are the worst kind of scum. The blonde archer seemed to decide on what his next word were, then he answered, since it's a lucrative business, quite a few of the twits support it. You'll hear stories of people disappearing from towns and cities. While some of those people may have been killed or went into hiding, about half of those cases will be due to slavers kidnapping a person off the street. Lucrute took a large swig of his ale before continuing. Sometimes the twits don't even bother to hide what they're doing. Ninia's sister was one of the many victims who was forced into slavery by a twit that took a liking to her. My eyes widened at his statement. Ninia's sister was enslaved? I could feel the fur of my tail standing on end, and it took some effort to keep a calm expression in front of Lucrute. This would not stand. I would not let the sister of my student suffer like this. New plan: talk to Ninia and get information about her sister, as well as a possible item of hers. Then, I will scry out her location and free her and any other soul that had also been enslaved. After that, interrogate slavers about whatever slave ring existed, and then kill everyone. Upon finishing the intricacies of my new plan, I chugged down the rest of my ale, much to the surprised looks of Lucrute and Celica. When I set down my tankard, I kept my voice under control. How long ago did Ninia's sister get taken? A little under 2 years. Ninia doesn't talk about it that much, but his whole goal as an adventurer is to one day rescue his sister from the twit that took her. 2 years was a long time to be enslaved under a noble, especially one that took a liking to her. This isn't even considering the possibility that she may have been sold to another group when the noble grew bored of her. I'll talk to Ninia about this tomorrow when I get back to Rantel. I'd rather have him focused on whatever job you guys are doing than to be distracted because of my prying. If that's what you want to do, I'll tell Ninia that you want to speak with him at the guild after we're done with our job. Mind telling me what you plan to talk to him about? Just a few queries between him and I. Since he's my student now, it's now my responsibility to make sure that he is doing well. I answered with a half-truth. Certainly, I'd be analyzing Ninia's mental state and how she was doing, but I would also tell her what I planned to do. Lucrute shrugged and sipped on his drink. At the same time, I noticed that Celica had disappeared into the crowd once more, probably to take care of other patrons besides us. When did Ninia become your student? This is the first time that I'm hearing about it. We talked about it on the way back to Rantel. I felt that he had the potential to become a great mage, so I agreed to teach him. I then gave the archer a sly grin before adding, and I get to endlessly tease him with no repercussions. Lucrute snorted in amusement. Then I wish Ninia good luck. Though, if you want to tease someone, I'm always right here for you, my beautiful sorceress. Rolling my eyes, I leaned over the table and lightly flicked the blonde's forehead. You lack any kind of shame that would make such an activity entertaining. And besides, all that I need to do to make you brain-dead is unbutton some of my dress. I retorted. Shame. The blonde said in an almost mournful tone as he drank his ale. Right on time, Celica came back to our table with our dishes in hand. With a skillful grace, she weaved between the crowds without spilling a single morsel of our food. And the amazing food has arrived. Lucrute was handed a wooden bowl filled with steaming stew that looked quite delectable, while I was given a plate with a slab of beef and bread. I wondered if Celica had all the food cooked in large batches or if each meal was made individually. Making the food in a large batch would explain how quickly our food arrived. Then again, I'm also ignoring the possibility of using magic to cook food, so who knows? I've got my food. Even better, Celica had another tankard of ale prepared for me. Hope you both enjoy your meals. I'd love to stick around and continue to tease my little cousin, but I've got a lot of hungry visitors to feed. I'll check on you both a bit later. And once more, the blonde flowed back into the crowd. We quickly started to dig into our food, and I am happy to say that Celica's cooking was delicious. It went like this for a while, Lucrute and I eating and chatting about random subjects. It was pretty average until we started trying to outdrink each other. It got serious enough that other patrons of the restaurant started watching us in interest. At this point, Lucrute and I had 6 tankards finished, and both of us were working on our 7th. Even though Lucrute had been downing his ales like a champ, his limit was becoming quite apparent. You gonna surrender yet? You are starting to wobble," the archer asked as he chugged down the rest of his tankard. "The ale must be hitting you harder than you thought because I'm not the one who's wobbling, that would be you," I retorted after slamming my empty tankard onto the table. Lucrute's face was completely flushed while his body swayed. In comparison, I was only lightly buzzed with a slightly warm face. This contest was a little unfair for Lucrute as he lacked a lot of advantages I had. For instance, while my body looked like that of a regular-sized woman, my 9 tails and large ears gave me a lot more body mass compared to Lucrute. And, even though I was trying to suppress my passive ability, poison immunity, it still nullified a bit of the alcohol in my body. If I wasn't suppressing my passive, I'd be completely sober. "Right. You're just trying to play off what you drank." Upon saying this, Lucrute's head hit the table with a thump as the sound of snoring filled our ears. I raised my hands in celebration while the onlookers who had been betting on me cheered in victory. With the entertainment finished, the crowd slowly dispersed to either the exits or other parts of the restaurant. The only person to approach our table was a laughing Celica. About time that one of Lucky's dates outdrank him. "I'd buy you a drink in celebration, but I think that you are probably tired of ale at this point." Leaning back in my seat, I nodded with her remark. "Yeah, I think that's enough to drink tonight." Looking back at Lucrute's unconscious form, I asked, "Any idea on what to do with Lucrute? I don't know where he lives, so that might hinder my ability to get him home." Celica waved me off with an appreciative look. "Don't worry, I have a spare bed set aside for guests just in case. It's not the first time Lucky has gotten too drunk to walk home. I'll get Sebastian to carry him to his bed. And, don't worry about paying for the food and drinks, I don't charge Lucky or his friends for services here." I nodded in thanks before getting up from my booth. Thanks for the food and service, the beef was delicious. Reaching into the pouch at my waist, I pulled out a vial filled with a red liquid before setting it on the table. It was a simple healing potion that I could easily make more of. "Give this to him in the morning, it'll help him with the headache." After saying this, I left the restaurant with a full stomach and a new collection of embarrassing moments over Lucrute's head. Happy moments like these made living in this world more bearable and took my mind off of everything I had learned from Loki earlier. I still couldn't help but wonder what being had pulled me into this world, and for what reason they had done so in the first place. Too many questions with too little answers. And then there was the warning Loki gave me about batches of players being brought into this world instead of individual players. That made me nervous as I couldn't predict how someone may act upon arriving here. They may act as a benevolent newcomer or, what I was more inclined to assume, a ruthless tyrant. Call it the pessimist in me, but when someone is given power that cannot be challenged, they usually tend to abuse that power for selfish means. I'm actually slightly worried about becoming a tyrant myself. Keeping my morals would be a test of my willpower which I couldn't fail. You were chosen by Freya to help those in need. Maybe that's true. While game mechanics ruled Yggdrasil, the gods were still aware of things that involved them. If Freya hadn't given me lectures since I arrived in this new world, then I must be doing something right. At least I could take solace with that knowledge. Day 4. As I stood in front of the great forest, I couldn't help but feel curious about what secrets hid within the massive maze of trees just waiting to be discovered. Even though this urge to explore tugged at me, I had to push it down because I had a job to do. Time to find this big one. Taking a sniff of the air, I noted 2 things. The stench of the ogres was easy to find despite the myriad of scents coming from the forest's edge, and there weren't any humans nearby to see me in my true form. I couldn't help but smile as I let my disguise disperse to reveal my true form. Time to greet the locals in my own personal style. Stepping into the threshold of the forest, I slowly started making my way through the woods while also following the scent of ogres that permeated the woods. One problem with walking into a territory that lacked humans encroaching upon it was the difficult terrain that made walking any annoying chore. I had to step over roots and branches, bypass bushes and other shrubbery, and avoid tripping over myself. This would have been a large hindrance to any other person, but after becoming annoyed enough with the terrain, I used my simple Spellblade, to chop apart anything in my way. Doing this made my journey so much easier. After walking through the forest for a while, the stench of ogre became a lot more intense, making me think that I had arrived at where I needed to be. This is exactly what I believed until I entered a small clearing that was filled with trampled earth, animal bones, and piles of shit and piss. Damn it, this was going to be more complicated than I originally thought. From what I'm going to guess, a small group of ogres had taken rest here before moving on. Looking at some of the deep footprints made by the heavy bodies of the ogres, I estimated that this group consisted of 4 or 5 ogres. A quick sniff of the air told me that this group was made up of all males. My eyes traced the path of the tracks which led further into the trees. Now, while I could just continue to follow the scents within the forest, it could also lead me to another ogre shithouse that lacked any of the ogres I was looking for. The best bet is to follow the trail the ogres here made and see if they could lead me to my target. After making my decision, I stopped walking and started to jog along the trail to catch up to my prey much faster. From the scents coming from the ogre tracks, they were made about 2 hours ago. That was going to be a lot of catch-up work on my part. And so, I jogged along the trail for what felt like half an hour until I found myself before a massive cave entrance. This certainly seemed like a place that ogres would rest in, and taking a sniff in the air, I noted that there was a new scent mixed in with the ogres. This was the stench of trolls. Actually, a troll taking over this section of the forest and ruling ogres wasn't unbelievable. In Yggdrasil, trolls were seen as mini-bosses compared to ogres. They could regenerate unless attacked with acid and fire and had much greater strength than ogres. I've seen players under level 20 get slaughtered by trolls because they couldn't hurt it faster than it healed. I couldn't blame newer players for this as they lacked the knowledge of a troll's weaknesses, though any player over level 30 would easily outdamage their healing. This would be a very simple task to handle if it came down to violence, and considering that the ogres in this world were quite violent, I wouldn't doubt that this big one was even Moresso. It would be up to the big one and any others with him to fight me or surrender. I couldn't help but smirk as I strutted into the cave with as much swagger as I could muster. From what I've learned, showing a ridiculous amount of confidence before one's enemies was an excellent demoralizing tactic. It's one thing to see a person calmly walk into battle and be worried, it was a totally different matter if that same person was literally skipping into battle with a shit-eating grin on their face. It was simple to hear the chatter of the inhabitants in the cave as I got closer, along with spotting the bones and trash from previous meals. Some of them were humanoid in shape, alerting me that they were more than willing to devour sapient beings. After rounding a corner, I came face to face with a large group that was a mix between trolls and ogres. I easily spotted the biggest troll in the cave glaring down at me with yellow eyes that were enhanced by the large tusks jutting from his lip and large nose. He was green, like baby vomit, and covered in many layers of muscles that could no doubt allow him to easily pop a normal human's head like a cherry. Held in his right hand was a massive cleaver larger than I was. "Knock knock. We need to talk," I said while stepping towards the troll with immense confidence. "Who dares to intrude upon my territory? You look similar to a human, yet your smell and animal parts of yours say otherwise," the big one demanded in rage. "My name's Kasha." As I said this, I was 7 meters away from him while continuing to stride forwards. "From what I've heard, you're known as the Big One, and you've been the reason for many ogres fleeing south. You know this, and still you come before me. You certainly are brave, beast woman. I am Gu, ruler of the East," the troll remarked with a chuckle. "It's very polite of you to tell me your name. What's the reason?" I asked as I finally stood a meter away from Gu with my head craned upwards to meet his gaze with mine. Gu hefted his cleaver over his shoulder and barked out a laugh before answering, "I like to let those I kill know the name of their killer. But I respect the bravery that you've shown to even stand before me, so I'll let you tell me what you wish to say before I kill you." Placing my hands on my hips, I spoke, "I'm here to give you an ultimatum. Surrender to me as your new boss or leave this territory. Your activities here have been causing ogres to flee south and come into conflict with the humans living there. If not stopped, the humans will eventually send an army to deal with it, which will create needless death." After saying this, Gu and all his followers openly laughed at my demands, disbelieving that a small woman like myself could ever threaten them. I let them have their fun because it would be all the sweeter to watch them drop their jaws as they realized how much stronger I am to them. Eventually, Gu found his voice once more, "Beast woman, that is the most amusing thing I've heard in a long time. I'll make sure to add your head to my belt after I finish removing it from your body." Upon saying this, he swung his sword down upon me with the intention to kill me. I took it as well as a mosquito trying to bite me, and I had two of my tails catch the sword strike before wrapping them around the blade. I stabbed two of my tails into the ground to anchor myself and smirked at the confused look on Gu's face. "What was that about taking my head? I'm sorry to inform you, but I like my pretty little head attached to my neck. Now, let's try this again." With barely any effort, I ripped the sword away from Gu and let my tails hold the blade aloft for a moment. Then, I snapped the blade in half and dropped the pieces at Gu's feet. "You will either accept me as your new boss, and I can make it worth your while, leave this territory, or die. I am being very kind to you right now, don't test me." After saying this, I noticed that many of Gu's followers were looking at him for his leadership. Gu growled in rage before attempting to smash me with his fist. Like the sword, my tails easily maneuvered in front of his fist and blocked the punch. Then another one of my tails whipped him in the face and sent him toppling into the ground. "You beast bitch. You were funny at first, but now I'm angry." My eyebrow rose up at his enthusiastic name-calling. When he finally stood back up, I slammed a tail at his legs and made him fall once again. "Trust me, Gu, stay down because I'm not letting you stand back up." Even with my warning, the troll continued to try standing. In return, I'd send him back face first into the dirt. Even though I could easily kill him right now, I didn't, as I was trying to send every troll and ogre in this cave a message. From what I'd learned of the ogres yesterday, they valued strength above all else. The way I seemed to just toy with Gu was letting every being in this cave know that I've got so much strength that I don't even need to treat this fight seriously. This continued on for a few more minutes, and I watched realization dawn in the eyes of every single being in the cave. "Stop your stupid tricks," Gu shouted in frustration. "Everyone, attack the beast bitch." While Gu seemed confident that his followers would obey him, that quickly ebbed away when none of his followers came near us. "You idiots!" I said, "attack her." Still, none of them moved. "Help me. I'm sorry to inform you, but all of them have finally understood the lesson that you have not." I chided with the tone of a disappointed parent. "What lesson?" "They follow me, I am the strongest." Gu barked back with rage burning in his yellow eyes. "No, the lesson that all of them have learned is that I'm the top bitch now. I've barely done anything but toy with you this entire time. You, on the other hand, have been doing everything to put a single scratch on me." I lectured, much to Gu's ever-increasing rage. "Shut up. They obey me." Even though the troll channeled a lot of his emotion into that statement, even he seemed to start losing all that bluster from earlier. To prove a point to him, I shouted out to everyone in the cave. "The strongest person is made leader of all of you. Who is right now the strongest?" To punctuate my point, I crushed Gu's head into the ground, creating a small growing crater, much to the pained moans of the troll. For a few moments, the trolls and ogres in the cave seemed hesitant to answer, but eventually an ogre spoke out, "Kasha is stronger." With that declaration made, it was soon followed by a chorus of agreement from the other being in the cave. "Who should be your leader?" This time, they answered much faster, "Kasha." Looking back down to my beaten foe, I spoke, Your followers have made their choice. What will you decide? I will never follow a pink-skinned beast bitch. He made one last struggle to stand, but I swiftly ended this attempt by stabbing my tail through his brain until it exited the other side. For a few moments, his body froze in place, then I pulled out my tail and watched as his body collapsed lifelessly to the ground, with only a few twitches giving any sign of life to the troll. Looking up from the corpse at my feet, my eyes panned around the cave before I decided to speak. I am Casablanca, a kitsune from a foreign land. I give you all a choice. You can accept me as your leader and be provided for, or you can leave this place under the agreement that I am the ruler of this territory and that all other intelligent beings are to be left alone and not attacked. For a few tense moments, no one moved. Then, a troll approached me and kneeled. This started a cascade of movement as most of the inhabitants bowed to me, while some left the cave untouched. While some with power like mine would have not given them the option to walk away, I couldn't do that. I believed everyone should have a choice to join a group or leave, otherwise it was too similar to slavery. Still, I couldn't help but smile at the newest additions to the settlement. Everyone, I will make a portal to a settlement that I'm the leader of. When you step through, you'll be given jobs, food, and housing. While I'm gone, the person in charge is the hobgoblin map. Welcome to the settlement. As I said this, I created a portal next to me. Map and my copy would be able to deal with our newest additions while I continued working. It took a short amount of time for everyone to enter the portal until I was left as the only remaining inhabitant. Afterwards, I shut down the portal and exited the cave with a sense of accomplishment. The best reward for getting so much done today was a nice trip to the lake. Casting the spell, Fly, I floated up into the air to get my bearings. It didn't take much for me to spot the blue water of the lake in the distance, and upon doing so I cast Teleport to arrive at the edge of it. With a snap of my fingers, all of the clothing besides my underwear and world item was stored into my inventory as I took a glance at the large lake before me. To be honest, it was slightly strange to see the waters of this lake look so clean. Back home on Earth, I had been to Lake Michigan once, and it had been filled with garbage, sewage, and dead wildlife. It was pretty ironic that we trashed that lake so badly when it was one of the only sources of drinkable water in the world. From what I remember, about a decade ago they passed a law that gave life imprisonment for dumping in any lake. Too bad that law was put in place too late to actually matter. This would be the first natural body of water that I'll have ever jumped into in my life, and I wasn't going to waste this opportunity. With a running start, I jumped from the shore and began swimming to my content. The water wasn't too cold or warm, which made swimming a joy. One convenient thing about my tails was that due to their length, and how shallow the water was, I could lay back and let my tails act as stilts to keep me afloat. Letting the light of the sun warm me, I wondered if this was what living decades ago was like. If so, then I could get used to little moments like this. Eventually, I closed my eyes and floated atop the water. My ears could pick up all the sounds the wildlife made around me both on the land and in the water. After a while, I think I began dozing off as my tails aimlessly ferried me across the water. What pulled me out of my relaxed state was when I heard a voice calling out to me, "Hey, are you all right?" With a soft sigh, I decided to answer without opening my eyes. "Yeah, just taking a swim and relaxing," I answered back. "While I don't want to ruin your relaxation, you're about to break the netting of my fishery," he stated. I opened my eyes and looked around until I spotted a rudimentary fishery made up of poles and nets that I was slowly drifting to. "Sorry, I probably dozed off," I answered as I let my feet touch the mud floor of the lake. "Nice fishery, you make it?" I asked as I squeezed some water out of my hair before turning to see this person. "Well, I didn't expect to meet a lizard person today." "Neat." Yes, it was a technique I learned from traveling to other places. Even though I've seen a lot of strange things during my journeys, I'm not sure I've ever encountered any of your kind before," the lizard man retorted. He was taller than me, with dark brown scales and a light cream color on his underside, intelligent hazel eyes, and a large red brand on his chest. While he was certainly unique, what really caught my attention was the weapon strapped to his side that looked like it was made from a chunk of ice. That weapon seemed to radiate a small amount of mana from it. Walking out of the water and to the shore, I instinctually shook my tails back and forth to remove some of the water on my fur. I probably looked like a weird dog doing so. I doubt you would. My kind is a bit rare, and my home is extremely far away. I answered as I walked over to the lizard man. Either way, we rarely get travelers in these parts. Any reason that you came here today? While the lizard man's question seemed quite innocent, I also noticed that his arm was tense to draw his weapon out. When I first arrived in this country and heard that it had a massive lake up north, I had planned to come here eventually. Today was convenient to do so as I had to take care of some business in the forest. I answered before holding out my hand to the lizard man. I'm Kasha, mind introducing yourself? For a moment, the lizard man held back, but he eventually returned the handshake. Zarasu. It's nice to meet a fellow traveler without having to leave home. How long have you been on the road? A few years now. I just arrived in this country a few days ago and I've been exploring what I could. Though, I did so in a less conspicuous form to fit in with the populace. I answered while demonstrating my shapeshifting to Zarasu. He grinned at my display. That trick would have been very convenient when I traveled near human settlements. A lot of them aren't the friendliest to non-humans. Got chased out of a few towns because they thought I'd eat their babies. I couldn't help but smirk at Zarasu's remark. That ability of mine part of the reason you've never seen any of my kind before now. The kitsune have a proclivity to be shy and are well versed in the use of illusions, so it's hard to spot us. It could be that you've encountered a kitsune before, and just didn't know it. I then added with a smirk, that'll probably make you a bit paranoid the next time you enter a place with a lot of humans. I'll take your word for it the next time I arrive at a human settlement, Zarasu joked before glancing at his fishery. I followed his gaze and let my eyes follow the schools of fish swim within the confines of the netting. Something interesting about your fishery that I don't know about? I said with growing curiosity. From what Zarasu said before, the technology of a fishery was quite new to him. An advancement like this made me very interested depending on if his society was more typically based upon the hunter-gatherer mindset. Zarasu looked back to me with an intelligent gaze before replying, sorry, I'm just getting lost in thought about my plans for the fishery. I've only recently started this project, and the future of my tribe might depend upon if this works or not. I'm going to guess that your tribe has problems with a food shortage. It was the most logical guess if Zarasu's tribe was depending on the success of this fish farm. While the design of the fishery, which consisted of a series of poles stabbed into the ground and netting running between the poles, was quite rudimentary, it still had potential for advancement. Not just my tribe, all the lizard men tribes have been suffering a food shortage. That seemed strange. Considering the size of this lake, there should be more than enough food to catch from the waters. Another variable must be somehow involved in the food shortage that I just wasn't seeing yet. Mind telling me more about this food shortage? How did it begin in the first place? That is a bit of a story. While standing around out here, he didn't get the chance to finish as I snapped my fingers and watched a befuddled expression cross Zarasu's face as a pair of chairs and a table were conjured before his eyes. One of the upsides of having chosen of Loki as a class is that it made my illusions physical where they once were intangible. Helped for conjuring party tricks like this. Would you like to take a seat? I have a lot of time to spare for listening. I invited the lizard man. I took a seat in the conjured wooden chair. Hesitantly, Zarasu took up my offer and tentatively sat in the chair, acting as if it would disappear from under him. At the same time, I conjured a fluffy robe to cover myself. I take it that you're a strong magic user if you can so casually conjure up items from thin air. Zarasu remarked. Very strong. But that isn't important right now, your food shortage is. A puzzled expression grew on Zarasu's face at my answer. You're the first outsider that has ever found interest in the lizard men tribe's plight. Why does it interest you so much? Your problems are something that I've had personal experience with. Since I have the ability to help, it would be wrong of me to let a group of people die of starvation. I couldn't hide the emotion in my voice as I said this. On Earth, the amount of times that I'd seen people starving on the streets was uncountable. Part of the problem came from how there was less usable land that wasn't polluted with refuse and heavy emissions, livestock being harder to raise due to said pollution, and the difficulty in finding a job that would let you afford to eat. While places like India, Africa, and China had it the worst due to either a high population, poor GDP, or unusable land, first world countries still had difficulty in feeding their own. When you had essentially an oligarchy running the country as well as many menial jobs being automated, the prices of goods skyrocketed. So, hearing that Zarasu's people were starving hit me a little too close to home, especially after everything that happened yesterday. Leaving my former world behind gave me the perspective to know how I could help this new world, and I'd be damned if I let this world become like my old one. Then, I guess I should start at the beginning. About a generation ago, the 7 lizard men tribes migrated to the Great Lake in search of a new home. While this seemed like a fortuitous location, the tribes were proven wrong by the toadmen who also inhabited the lake. A war between our two peoples occurred with the lizard men ending as the losers. Because of this, we were forced from the better northern territories of the lake and down to the southern end, where food is less abundant for us. This war also caused the disbanding of one of the 7 tribes, leaving only 6 left. Why couldn't your people and the toadmen come to some type of agreement? There is probably more than enough food for either group in this lake. Even though I was trying to be optimistic, I could already guess why the two groups came into conflict. Moments later, and my thoughts were proven correct by Zarasu, the toadmen saw us as invaders in their home. Beyond that, compared to the toadmen, people are less technologically advanced and are seen as barbarians to the toadmen. There was too much of a cultural divide between our peoples to find a middle ground in such a short time. Conflict was inevitable, and afterwards our tribes warred with one another due to there being less food in the southern end of the lake. After that conflict, only 5 tribes remain today. I see now. I have a question: what can the lizard man normally eat? Are you limited to just fish, or do you have a wider appetite? We're typically omnivorous, though the territory of the lake makes it difficult to farm as we lack the skills to raise crops and the wetland only allows for certain edible vegetation to grow which isn't native to this lake. We mainly subside on fish due to it being the most readily available food source. Resting my chin in my hand, I deliberated on a decision that could benefit both Zarasu's people and myself. Here's an idea of mine that could work to help both your people and mine. Right now, I've been working on building up a settlement that could act as a bastion for equality among all races. It's still a work in progress, but we've got a decent size consisting of goblins, hobgoblins, ogres, and trolls. During this, I've been teaching the inhabitants different skills, with one of those skills being farming. Zarasu shared a look of interest at what I'd said, which told me that he wasn't averse to a proposal of mine. I have been working on expanding the settlement, and due to my abilities, I'm able to easily alter large sections of land for whatever purpose I have. From this, I could easily create terrain similar to your lakes which could be converted into multiple fisheries that your people could maintain. It would add another food source that could feed both of our groups, more diversity to the settlement, which at this point should be considered a small town, and allow for both of our peoples to share knowledge with one another. While your idea seems good in theory, my tribe would take a lot of convincing to even consider looking into some of your proposal, and that's not even accounting for them leaving their homes for a location that is completely unknown. Even though you are giving a very generous offer, I've only just met you and have no proof to any of your claims. Zarasu respectfully replied. I nodded in understanding as I already foresaw a bit of reluctance in this idea. Zarasu needed something more substantial than just simple promises. This is what gave me an idea on how to show Zarasu my claims to be more than cheap promises. Then let me show you, if you'll put a little bit of trust in me, I said with an optimistic tone. They say the first step in a good relationship is to show trust, and it is my duty to my tribe to bring back things that could aid them. I'm willing to see what you may offer to my people, but I warn you that if this is a trick, I will not hesitate to do what it takes to protect my tribe." He ended with a pat to the ice weapon at his side. "I promise you that no harm will befall you or your people from what I plan to show you, and I don't break my promises. Now, let's start this off with my first magic spell," I said excitedly, like a magician performing a magic show, as I dismissed the robe I was wearing and re-equipped my normal outfit. "Charm species," I announced as I cast the spell, making sure to avoid the fish in the fishery. Instead, my targets were the fish within 100-yard radius of me. "Come to me, please," I shouted across the water and watched the water of the lake quickly begin rippling as fish rushed to swim over to me. It's one thing to see an NPC creature that's programmed to follow a request and another thing entirely to see real creatures do the same. Damn, do I love magic. Eventually, a large mass of fish consisting of a myriad of species just swim about near the lake shore. "Could all of you wait right here for a minute or two? I'll be right back." With that said, I turned to Zarasu. "Now, for my next trick, I'll transport us from one place to another. Greater teleportation." In that instant, both Zarasu and I disappeared from the Great Lake and appeared atop one of the walls overlooking and protecting the settlement. Zarasu seemed momentarily dazed from being transported from one location to another, but when he steadied himself, he looked in awe at the settlement before him. Due to my duplicate helping out in the settlement's expansion, there was now a large amount of buildings dotting the landscape. Located on either side of the front gate were two large towers that were made using the Create Fortress spell. From the number of ogres and/or trolls entering or exiting the structures, I had to guess that they were guard towers. But while the towers were about 30 or so meters high, they didn't compare to the circular building in the center of the, let's call it a town at this point, that was about 60 meters high and had a 40-meter circumference. Was that a town hall? At the left corner of the wall by the gate was a large farm that had been dug out by the combined efforts of the ogres and goblins. Further north of the farm and front gate were many buildings of different sizes that had replaced the simple earthen huts from yesterday. Even now, I could see my copy creating more houses for the influx of new citizens. On the right side of the front gate was a rudimentary lumber mill that had a couple of ogres and trolls hacking and sawing through tree trucks to make wooden planks and pillars. By the pond, I saw a building that had smoke billowing from a chimney as a few goblins were hard at work cooking some type of stew for citizens to eat. The shack my clone had made by the pond had also been renovated to look like a cozy cabin. The space past the shack already had goblins and ogres installing fencing for a potential animal pen. My copy works fast, I'll give her that. We started from sticks and blankets and now have moved up to buildings that match the craftsmanship of those in E-Rental. Still, while the updated architecture was a pleasure to look at, it wasn't part of my task at hand. Turning to an empty section of forest outside the wall we were on, I made a quick layout plan for what I planned to do. "Zarasu, if you think the village is amazing, you'll be floored when you see my next magic trick." Saying this caused the lizard man to take his eyes off the village and look at me. Then, I said, "Creation," and watched magic circles form up around me as the spell charged up. When the spell was finally finished charging, I unleashed my will upon the very land itself and watched as trees in a 5-acre radius were pushed off to the side and merged into other trees. Next, the treeless section of land cratered until it had varying depths that reached a few hundred feet. At this moment, it looked like a large canyon. That changed as a moment later, the canyon began to rapidly fill up with water until an entire lake was quickly created before our very eyes. To finish this off, I created a new gate in the wall facing the gate to allow for easier access as well as 7-meter-high walls to surround the lake. When I was finally finished, I turned to Zarasu and grinned. "What do you think?" Zarasu didn't even speak as he looked from me and back to the lake I had just created within 2 minutes. He eventually found his voice and spoke, "Hey, are you a god?" "Maybe." I couldn't help but tease him about my divinity. "Now, I wouldn't fully react just yet if I were you. I'm not done yet." Greater teleportation. Once more, the two of us were teleported back to the great lake in front of my adoring schools of fish. Made me really feel like the comic character Aquaman right now. Gate. I said as a portal appeared in the water of the lake. Can all of you fish please enter this gate to a new lake I just made? The fish followed my request again, and I watched as hundreds of fish splashed into the portal which led into my artificially created lake. Now, I was done. And, just like that, I've created a new body of water with its own ecosystem. How does my offer look now? This is something beyond impossible. Who and or what are you? The spells you cast were things rumored to belong to the realm of gods, and yet you casually display them without any effort, Zarasu said quickly as his brain tried to comprehend my awesome power. I'm just a traveler who is creating herself a new home and trying to make this world a better place. The power I have doesn't matter as much as the intent I have to help others with them is. My offer to you is not forced, and you can decline it or make a new offer if that is what you wish. I'm just here to help. While Zarasu still seemed a bit perturbed by the revelation of my powers, he also lost some of the tenseness in his stance at my words. What you've shown me is something that I need to tell the rest of my tribe about. This offer of yours is too important for only me to decide upon. The chief and elders of my tribe must debate over this subject. If you were to follow me back to my village, you could bring your proposal for them to hear. Zarasu answered in a serious tone. It seemed like my demonstration worked to nudge his opinion on my offer for him and his tribe. What I was also interested in, following the consensus of Zarasu's tribe, was if I could reach out to the 4 other lizardmen tribes. If I could get them to agree with joining my village, that would greatly enhance the village's growth. The large influx of citizens might also get more beings to notice and wish to join us. Though, I would have to take care about the Re-Esti's kingdom as they might not take kindly to a growing power within their borders. They will never harm those under my protection. I will not allow it. I would fight off all enemies to come to my village. If any wished to harm my people, then they would face the full wrath of a kitsune demigoddess. Take me to your people whenever you're ready. But, if this decision were up to you, what would your choice be? I asked with curiosity. Kasha, if you wanted to destroy my people and there's no doubt that it would be an effortless process for you. You are giving us the choice on whether to join your or not, and providing us land and the possibility to create a sustainable food source is too good of an offer to ignore. I'd accept it immediately because the future you offer to the tribe is more certain than what we have now. I'm also still convinced that you are some kind of god, meaning that we'd literally be receiving divine assistance. Zarasu answered. Fair enough. Even with everything that I was shown and told by the stranger known as Kasha, I still half expected that this entire meeting was something closer to a dream than a reality. Everything about this woman was a mystery that I couldn't yet solve. She gave no definitive answer to her divinity, and yet she cast spells that were beyond anything I'd ever seen before. Without effort, she created a lake and populated it with fish that she commanded to obey her orders. She cast a form of a teleportation spell and moved hundreds of fish, and the 2 of us, to a small village filled with goblins, ogres, and trolls that were working together. From encountering enough of those species, I know that it's rare to see a large number of them working together, but having an entire village full of them not fighting each other was on an entirely different level from the small groups that I'd seen before. And then there was Kasha's species. She claimed to be of the kitsune race, and yet I've never once heard of them in all my travels. There should have been some story or tale of humans who had multiple tails, and yet nothing existed on them that I should have learned from somewhere. Even with her claim that the kitsune were a race that was shy, one of them should have been sighted or at least heard of by now. The one thing that I did believe was her good intentions for my people. Her overwhelming magical prowess could easily destroy my people and we'd be unable to stop it. Even if her strongest ability was to alter the very land itself, that would be more than enough to cover my village under a layer of rock. And, that was if her land-altering ability was her strongest ability. There could be something else that she hadn't even revealed to me that could trump her previous feat. I would have to have a long discussion with my brother and the elders about her proposal to join our village with hers. Even if there was an initial resistance to joining Kasha, we needed something to stabilize the tribe. My prototype fishery was still too small to feed the village continuously, and it needed to be adopted by the village quickly if we wished to stop any more of the tribe from dying of famine. At the same time that we are suffering, so are the other tribes living on the lake. Who knows how long it might be before another war breaks out to destroy another tribe in order to free up resources? At this point of time, if one of the other tribes were to ally with another and attack us, we'd be destroyed since it was difficult to maintain fighters when everyone had to work on gathering food. If the tribe were to stay at the lake that Kasha created for only a year, we'd be able to grow strong once again without a famine weakening us and fear of our tribe being attacked every day. Even allying ourselves with Kasha would ensure our protection from other threats. Another reason for why I was curious about the tribe joining with Kasha's village was because I've never heard of any village nearby that accepted all races into their territory. The only place that I could think did something similar was the Ardland Council state, which was far up north. The final reason that I didn't wish to brush off Kasha's offer so simply is due to her divinity. That level of magic used to alter the land so easily was of a tier that I'd never believed was possible for a simple mortal. Her unclear answer about her divinity didn't help to dissuade my beliefs, especially because of how I've heard of too many legends about gods that disguised themselves and walked among mortals. This just seemed too similar for me to turn a blind eye to, and if she was a god, then insulting her in some form could have repercussions for not just me, but the rest of the tribe as well. Hey, Zarasu, you've been very quiet for a while. I hope that you're not afraid that I'll bite you and you must be loaded with questions that you wish to ask me. Looking over at Kasha, I gave her a nod before speaking. To be fair, I am still nervous about anything that I may say which could upset her. Sorry, Kasha, I'm just deep in thought at the moment, I hope that doesn't bother you? The woman simply smiled and waved my apology off before replying, it's fine. I've had moments where someone had to yell at me to pull my mind back to reality. I couldn't help but smile at the personal flaw that she admitted, and she quickly noticed my reaction. So you do have a sense of humor. Still, what's on your mind that I could possibly answer? For one thing, you stated earlier that you've only been in this country for a few days, and yet you've already gotten so much built in your village. How did you even get so many beings to live in your there? The amount of people there would make one assume that you at least brought a group of followers with you before you arrived in the country. While I had to show you my prowess in magic to you, most of the others in the village just saw how strong I was physically. The goblins and hobgoblins were a small group of bandits that were scraping out a living by robbing from weak travelers. When they tried to do the same to me, I handedly defeated all of them with just my tails. Afterwards, I talked with them and agreed to make them a self-sufficient group that didn't need to steal in order to survive. After saying this, I found it a little absurd that such a small woman, while strong magically, could also overpower a group of goblins so easily. And what about the ogres and trolls? It just started with 2 ogres that were part of a group that tried to raid a farm. I and a group of adventurers defeated most of the group except for 2 that ran away. After chasing after them, I questioned them before offering them a place in my village. The rest joined when I defeated the massive troll in the great forest that was leading all of them. I didn't need anything but my tails to show my strength, and they joined quickly afterwards. Did she mean to say that she defeated one of the 3 monsters of the forest? Whenever I left the lake in order to traverse the world, I always had to be wary about encountering even one of the 3. Of the 3, the physically strongest one was a giant troll known as Goo. He had amassed a large following of trolls and ogres that obeyed his commands. The giant troll that you speak of, he wouldn't have happened to be named Goo by any chance, would he? I asked, slightly in hope that Kasha had taken care of one of the dangers plaguing the great forest, and also in fear as it would mean that not a single one of my tribe could even hope to defeat her physically if it came to it. Yes, he was. How did you know? Goo is one of the 3 monsters, a trio that carved out different sections of the forest as their territory. If it's true that you managed to beat him, then that information could help you in convincing the tribe to join you. I answered. 3 monsters? Do you have any other information on the remaining 2 monsters? The way that Kasha asked me this made me wonder if she was actually going to search for them. This day just keeps getting stranger. Of the 3 known, the physically strongest was Gu, as well as the most known. The other being is a Naga with an extremely long name. They generally stay hidden and attack trespassers when they least expect it. The last creature is unknown, as none have survived to give out a description. It is simply known as the Wise King of the Forest. Kasha rested her chin in her hand in thought. I'll have to see about dealing with these 2 other monsters. While I killed Gu due to him causing problems that were creating conflict outside of the forest, I feel that these other 2 need to be dealt with in order to prevent innocent travelers in the forest from getting killed. If it'll help you, while the 3 monsters are territorial in their own ways, they can at least be reasoned with. There are a few stories of travelers offering food to the Wise King for safe passage, with most offerings being accepted. I could actually attest that claim, as I once had to travel through the Wise King's section of the forest. Offering them some fish had granted me travel, though I never saw what they looked like. I'll have to keep that in mind. Kasha muttered to herself, any other questions? This question had been filling my mind for a while with all the potential possibilities it brought. You mentioned that your culture was advanced. What other technologies did they possess besides fisheries? Now that question is a little hard to answer. Why, did they have only a few advancements? No, it's because we had so many advancements that it's hard to keep track of. We had the printing press, a device that could create hundreds of copies of a book in only a fraction of the time done by hand. There was also refrigeration, where we discovered how to keep foods chilled and preserved for longer in any environment. There were also the farming techniques that revolutionized food production, and those are only simple advancements. Of the 3 advancements that Kasha mentioned, the one that stuck with me was the printing press. It could take days to years for a scribe to transcribe the entirety of a book's contents onto another. The idea that there was a device that could make 100 copies of a book in only a fraction of the time it takes now would change learning forever. The knowledge within one book could be spread to 100 with the onset of a printing press. It would also make the owner of such a device one of the richest beings in the world, as people from all around would come to this person to have their books copied. How is it that knowledge of this printing press hasn't spread to other lands yet? Surely such a discovery would eventually be spread across the world by now. My people tend to keep to themselves. Our nation remains hidden from the outside world unless some of us travel beyond its borders. Since I'm one of the few that has, I have quite a bit of knowledge from home that could help people in their daily lives. Kasha finished. Right, you said your people tend to keep to themselves a bit earlier. The one thing that was a bit odd about her race's shyness was the way that Kasha had come out to civilization and even revealed her form to me. Guess she was one of the exceptions to her race. Now, before we arrive at the village, you need to understand that my people are weary of strangers, so I hope you don't judge my people too harshly because of this. Don't worry, I'll try to rein in my eccentricities while in your village. The kitsune replied in amusement. I do wonder how your people must treat you, considering that you are one of the few to ever leave it. Do they have a stigma against you because of this? Yes. I answered with a bit of shock at how she surmised my treatment by my tribe. It was something that I'd taken notice of after leaving the Great Lake for the first time and then coming back. The tribesmen who'd once been open with me had stopped talking to me, and while being a traveler was supposed to be a great honor as it meant the retrieval of new information that would aid in survival, I'd found that the tribe elders didn't care to listen to my findings as much as they should. I thank the gods that my brother wasn't like that and actually took my opinions into consideration. Your tribe should treat one that brings back new ideas and technologies with greater respect. Such a shame. She remarked with disappointment. It's not entirely bad, Kasha. My brother takes great interest in what I learn on my travels and has adopted a few of my ideas into the tribe without too much issue. The fishery was one of the ideas that he was very keen on expanding, if the test run that I've set up works. I just hope that Kasha doesn't become less inclined to aid my tribe due to learning of its darker nature. Hopefully that doesn't hinder our goal at hand. She paused for a moment until another thought popped into her head. You've talked about your brother quite a bit. Would you care to tell me more about him? He's considered the strongest of our tribe, proven by his combat trials to remain our chief. Every year, he must fight any who challenge him for the right to rule. So far, he hasn't lost against any challengers. Aside from his combat ability, he's also a wise leader that listens to all the advice given before making a decision. I smirked before adding, just between us, he can be such a mother hen around me. I figure it's because I'm the younger brother. Kasha giggled at hearing this. I think that treating you like a kid is the job of all older siblings. I'm sorry to say, but I doubt that there's a magic spell that could fix it. If even a deity admits to being unable to change the curse of all younger siblings, then I fear that I am doomed, I said in amusement. Looking ahead, I could see the outline of the village, which told me that we'd soon arrive at our destination. We're almost done with our journey. Ready to meet the rest of my tribe. Really? And here I was enjoying our conversation about sibling torments. No worries, it'll still take us a few minutes at the rate of which we're walking. That reminds me, you mentioned that you had a few siblings earlier. Any stories? I didn't know if I had said something wrong since Kasha stayed silent for a few moments until she decided to answer. I was the youngest of my siblings. The oldest, Ketsuma-kun, was standoffish. She was more likely to stay off to the side than to join a group. It made it hard to connect to her, but that didn't mean she couldn't be a good friend when it mattered. The middle child, Fuwafuwashiri, did her best when in the middle of a crowd. She was both hyper and very lazy. An odd combination of personality traits to be certain. How long has it been since you last saw them? They must be missing you if you've been gone for all these years. They aren't alive anymore. Fuwafuwa died during a massive war between two guilds. She and her guild were fighting against another, larger group that completely wiped the guild and all its members off the face of the world. I would have joined in to help, but I was off traveling while she was fighting. Kasha's voice trailed off as her eyes seemed to lose a bit of the shine that once filled them. I'm sorry for bringing up such a dark memory. Will you still be fine with coming to the tribe, or should we wait a few minutes? Even after apologizing, I couldn't help but wonder about Kasha's sister. What type of power would be needed to kill the sister of a deity if said sister wasn't a deity herself? How much strength would be required to kill a god? No need to apologize, Zarasu. You didn't know and I have gotten over it. But, to add on to my other sister, Ketsu, she disappeared a few months after Fuwa died. She hasn't been seen since, and at this point I just assume that she died. After she finished telling me about her sisters, Kasha looked at me with a smile. No matter. It's unhealthy to keep your mind in the past when you have a future to look forwards to and a present that's given to you. A nice saying, but it was obvious to tell that Kasha was hiding how she felt for my sake. Even if I wished to know more about what possibly could have killed her sister, it would be impolite and highly inappropriate to ask such personal questions when we only just met. Not that we'd have much of a chance to talk privately when we'd reach the tribe in less than a minute. Up ahead, I could spot one of the guards patrolling the area for predators or invaders. I even knew him, Farquick, a large lizard man that even towered over my brother. His mud-brown scales made him perfect when he wished to blend in with the environment, while his large size gave him the advantage when catching enemies unaware. While a few of the tribe believed that he could take my brother on for the title of chief, I knew that Farquick lacked any sense of ambition to try and take Shajiriu's title. He was perfectly content with the simple responsibilities of a guard. Besides a lack of ambition, Farquhar was also one of few of the tribe that didn't care about tribal hierarchy, which meant that he didn't care that I was a traveler. I'll do the talking for now. Farquhar doesn't know you, so he'll be on edge, I told Kasha while waving to the guard. Your village, your rules. Anything that I should expect? Water. We live in a swamp, so there are some sections of the village which are flooded. There wasn't much that I could really prepare Kasha for. Well, except for the children. They might try to get close and investigate her, since none of the children had ever seen one without scales before. Will you next be telling me that water is wet or that the sky is blue? Looking up at the sky, I looked back down to Kasha. Actually, I see a few clouds in the sky that are white. Does that help? We were both silent until we started laughing at our jests. I'll keep your preferences for hearing me state the obvious in mind for the future. Good luck, Zari. I couldn't help but raise my brow at the new nickname of mine. Zari? Your name's a bit of a mouthful, and I'm not the most formal of people. Does that bother you? Not really. It just threw me off is all. Just try and not call me that when we meet the elders and especially my brother. He will never let that one go. I sincerely hope that Kasha didn't end up embarrassing me while she was here. Looking away from Kasha, I spotted Farkesh walking towards us with his steel spear slung across his shoulders with a calm expression on his face. Periodically, his eyes would look in Kasha's direction as he studied her. Greetings, Farkesh. We have a visitor. Ho. Zarisu, it's been a while. Who's this stranger accompanying you? Farkesh asked as he planted the butt of his spear into the ground and leaned forwards on it in a relaxed position. This is a sorceress that I met named Kasha Blanc. She had a unique proposal for the tribe, and I wanted to bring her to my brother and the elders so that they could hear her out. I answered while leaving out some of the larger details. Depending upon how discussions went, I wanted to avoid putting the tribe into a panic over a deity visiting the village. Farkesh hummed in thought, must be something important if you brought an outsider here. This even brought you away from that big project I hear you've been working on. Ever plan on telling me what it is that you've got hidden at that shack of yours? It's true that I've been secretive about the prototype fishery of mine, but I had good reasons for it. If the tribe learned that there were a bunch of fish ripe and for the picking, then it was a certain possibility that some of the tribe would be tempted to sneak to my shack and steal the fish before my project was even finished. Only my brother knew exactly what I was making since I could trust him to not eat the fish before they were ready. At least I hoped so. I've seen him come by my shack a few times with a hungry look on his face just to watch the fish swim around the fishery. I swear, the minute that he learns when the fish are ready he'd be at my home with a plate in hand. Just wait. When my project is done, you'll be the second person after my brother to see it. I promised Farkesh. At least he'd be more patient than my brother. I'll hold you to that promise. Giving Kasha another glance, Farkesh added, I don't see anything wrong with letting this woman enter the village, at least as long as she's with you. What is she? Never heard anything about a human with tails and ears like that before. Kitsune. My race is called the Kitsune. Kasha interjected, I hope that helps, Farkesh. The large guardian smirked and nodded at Kasha's answer. At least you can speak. Never heard of your kind before. Reckon that you must be from far off. Farkesh turned to me and asked, she is from far off, right? My knowledge of others outside of the lake isn't as good as yours. Indeed. I nodded, much to the guard's relief. At least I didn't embarrass myself in front of the newcomer. Good luck with whatever business you have here. Don't cause a ruckus, else I'll have to get involved, which I really don't want right now. After saying this, Farkesh stepped aside to allow us through. Even if the big lizard man acted lazy, he is still a good guardian of the tribe. An advantage he had in his duties was his talent to discern friend from foe. It made him perfect at assessing visitors who entered the village. Him allowing Kasha through without issue swayed some of his doubts of bringing Kasha here. Upon entering the threshold of the village, I noticed Kasha looking around in curiosity at the buildings and inhabitants. As we continued walking, I was able to pick out a few of the children who were previously running around were now watching Kasha with mixed emotions. The chief's long house is up ahead. Before we arrive there, have you thought about what you're going to say to my brothers and the elders? Possibly. I have a question, do any of your elders have weak hearts which would be unable to stand any form of shock? That is very disturbing to ask. What could she be possibly planning that could result in any of the elders dying of a heart attack? Please avoid anything that could potentially kill the elders. That could destroy any possible relations between the tribe and you. I couldn't help but sigh at the havoc Kasha could cause. She waved my pleas off before adding something that worried me further. You won't have to worry about your elders dying. I'll just resurrect them if the worst comes to pass. Why did I even bother? Commanding a deity to rein themselves in was a futile attempt from the very beginning. Commanding a deity like Kasha is like reining in a rampaging storm. The best one could hope for is that the storm would pass over and not cause too much destruction. Yet, even with the chaotic personality of hers, she did show an intellectual side in our conversations. Even now, I noticed how her ears twitched at the slightest sound while her feline eyes studied all the activity around her. It made it hard to truly read her at times. You don't have to sneak about. Kasha suddenly announced while turning around, I won't bite. After saying this, 3 children nervously stepped out into full view from behind a hut that they'd been hiding. It was easy to recognize these 3 since they'd run about the tribe every day playing games. 2 of them were siblings with matching coloring similar to bricks that made up human settlements. One, a boy named Zirulu, who stood the tallest of the trio, was the troublemaker of the group. The other, a girl named Shasana, was the shortest of the group, yet she made up for it with her tenacity and the muscles that were already developing on her body. The last of the group was a boy named Zeresh. The boy took after his father, Farkesh, in appearance, though his size did leave much to be desired as he was nowhere near the stature of his father. He had time to grow at least, but his size was a sore spot for the time being. Zeresh was usually dragged along into the siblings' misadventures that spanned all across the village. My only solace of living away from the rest of the tribe was that I hadn't been terrorized by the trio just yet. That may yet change as they get older, since that usually made children bolder in their actions. I've heard so many complaints from my brother about all the messes that he's had to clean up after the pulled one of their practical jokes. Come on, Zaru, she doesn't look that scary. Shasana confidently stated as she marched forwards. I don't know, Shash. I've heard all kinds of stories about no scales being violent and warlike. Zeresh replied as he eyed Kasha with suspicion. You're just talking about humans, Zaru. Can't you see that the outsider ain't human? She's got those tails and ears. Ever heard of a human having tails and ears? Zirulu interjected as he began pulling Zeresh forwards towards Kasha. Doesn't mean that the outsider isn't an enemy. Could be a spy for one of the other tribes. Zeresh acted paranoid about potential threats due to his goal of eventually joining his father in guarding the village. This meant that he could be quite overzealous in defending the village. Regardless of his opinion on our visitor, his traitorous companions dragged him with them to Kasha. How do you use that many tails? Doesn't it get confusing to keep track of? Zirulu asked in interest. Kasha seemed slightly surprised at being asked the question. Yet, the surprise fell away to amusement as a smirk grew on her face. A human might ask the same of you if you met one. Kasha replied. But humans are strange. Not having tails must make them really unbalanced. One elder, Korkoris, lost her tail and needs a cane now to walk. Shasana added in. It may seem strange that they lack tails, but not every race in the world can grow a tail. While a human grows up without a tail, they are very capable of great dexterous feats. We just have an advantage on races without tails since we have another limb to utilize. Kasha then giggled and added, in my case, I have quite a few more limbs than most others. Wouldn't that give enemies more spots to target on your body? Seems a hindrance to have all that extra weight. Zeresh remarked with that combat-inspired curiosity. His question did have merit if he didn't know what I did. The weight that came from the fur, muscles, and bones in Kasha's tails would likely add up to the weight of another human, yet her immense strength countered this so-called hindrance. Of all the limbs on my body, my tails are both the strongest and toughest ones. Their adamantine durability can even allow me to use them as a shield to block attacks. Another new trait that I learn about the kitsune. At this point, I feel like I'll need to get a journal to write down all of this information about the kitsune that I've been learning. Another one would probably be needed just for Kasha herself. They don't seem that tough. Shasana muttered. Appearances can be deceiving. Isn't that right, Zarasu? I nodded at the question and remained silent. Just because I don't look that intimidating with my fluffy tails and ears doesn't mean that I couldn't beat someone to a pulp with them. While saying this, I noticed how 3 of Kasha's tails had begun snaking into position above the trio while her other tails worked on keeping the attention of the children occupied. I kept quiet about what I thought Kasha was about to do, namely because this would probably be amusing. Keep that in mind when you encounter opponents, since the best defense one could ever have is to be underestimated. She took this moment to strike as her 3 tails whipped downwards until they wrapped themselves around the waists of each child. Effortlessly, Kasha's tails lifted all 3 squirming children into the air. Second lesson of combat: avoid focusing on one area of your opponent for too long, since they might just be trying to distract you from their true intentions. No fair. We weren't even ready, Zirulu exclaimed as he tried to pry himself out of serpentine grip of Kasha's tail. The kitsune laughed at the complaint before turning her attention to me. Hey, Zarasu, think these kids would make nice decorations to hang above me while I'm in this village? Hearing the potential humiliation, all 3 children struggled to escape Kasha's grip with a new intensity. While it would be hilarious, I doubt that their parents would be too thrilled to hear that their children were being used as decorations by an outsider. I answered with a grin. Kasha playfully sighed in disappointment as she lowered the trio back on the ground before releasing them from her tails. Guess I have to play nice. I'm a guest here after all. Turning back to the children, I hope that you've learned to not judge a being based on their appearance, since they could make a fool of you, she consoled as she crossed her arms under her abnormally large chest. Why did humanoid mammals require such large milk storage areas in such an inconvenient area that could interfere with movement? I still didn't understand why human males had such an obsession with that anatomy. We understand. The trio answered with a more respectful tone to the kitsune. Could you teach me how to do that? Shasana asked with interest. Kasha seemed to ponder this before she replied. Maybe another time. Unfortunately, I've got some important business that needs to be taken care of. Really boring adult stuff, you know what I mean? What business do you have here that's so important? Zerish's question made me nervous that Kasha might say something that I'd rather have kept quiet. If these 3 learned the reason for our arrival, they'd no doubt spread that gossip fast enough that the entire tribe would know by nightfall. Just a few things that I need to talk to your chief about. She then leaned closer to the children and freed one of her hands to snap her fingers. A myriad of sparks burst from her fingers and started dancing around the trio before fizzling out. Magical stuff. She patted the trio on their heads before turning back to me and signaling me to move. See you kids later. Later, tail lady. The trio replied back before bursting into excited whispering as we walked away. From the way that Kasha's ears were twitching, I assumed that she could hear what they were discussing, since the amusement coming from her was palpable. You're pretty good with children. Especially those 3 troublemakers. She shrugged. Not that difficult. You just need to show them who's boss while also being personable. Those kids seemed like they wanted to see something interesting, so I gave them a show of it. Right. You're certain that it wasn't because you had the chance to terrorize some children? Strange how you immediately think about terrorizing children. Is that one of your fantasies? The kitsune rebutted. I could only roll my eyes at her taunt before refocusing my mind on the task at hand. Even now, her little display had attracted the attention of the villagers in the area, who would likely go on to tell their neighbors. The longhouse is right ahead. It'll be unlikely for all the elders to be assembled together inside, but my brother usually is there around this time of day to listen to the tribe. Up ahead, the longhouse was held aloft by stilts over the wet mud of the swamp. The longhouse didn't have much to differentiate it from the other huts of the tribe. It was circular in design and constructed of wood, unlike the roof, which consisted of a mix of mud and thatch. In the doorway, like all the other huts, a cloth blocked the view of the inside. The difference with the longhouse was that the symbol of the tribe was painted on it. Another difference with this building was its size. It was created to hold a greater amount of people at one time. Have you ever considered making doors for your buildings? It would be more durable in the long run than to use cloth. True that may be, yet creating doors takes greater work and tools that we lack. I answered. Ever considered becoming more industrious? Chopping down trees in less waterlogged environments to make more stable foundations, attempting to create mines for metals, expand into agriculture. I shook my head. Cutting down trees takes time, which is something the tribe lacks due to our consistent food shortages. Mining requires the knowledge of where to dig along with the ability to smith tools. Adding how hostile other beings of the lake and forest can be about their territory being encroached, and we are given few options. Ever considered finding a magic user that could enlarge your food so that you wouldn't have to worry about a lack of fish? That would be nice if not for a few problems. Casting enlarge would require a mage that can cast second-tier magic and knows that spell. Hard enough to find in any group, and harder still to get the mage to deign themselves to such menial work in the middle of a monster hotspot. Add into that problem is that the spell has a limit, so all that enlarged food would shrink after a few minutes. Even as I told her this, I couldn't help but predict that Kasha had something up her sleeve for this. So it seems that metamagic abilities are slightly harder to come by in this part of the world. The kitsune mused to herself. Metamagic is possible, it's just that I've never heard of any type of metamagic that could greatly extend the length of the spell you're proposing to create a viable food source. That's just because you haven't seen all of my fun tricks yet. I've already given myself an idea that may assist in convincing your tribe, so thanks for being my sounding board. What in the world is a sounding board? I had to ask this to get more clarification. It's a figure of speech meant for when someone assists in testing the validity of an idea. Something learned, something gained. I'll keep that saying in mind for the future. Aside from word choices, I seriously hope that whatever idea you just came up with wasn't your only idea. As I said this, we had already reached the steps of the longhouse, which we started ascending. Have a bit more faith in me. As she said this, I pulled the cloth of the doorway aside and entered first while Kasha followed closely after me. Inside the longhouse, a carpet made up of dried reeds and leaves woven together covered the ground. Ahead, sitting on a small bench, was my brother, Shaziryu, conversing with two elders. My brother and I shared similar coloring, yet that was where the similarities of our appearances stopped. Shaziryu was covered in scars from fights before his chiefdom, and many more received afterwards from challengers for his title. This continuous combat throughout his life had given him great strength that showed when comparing his size to mine. While our arrival wasn't noticed by the elders due to their backs to us, Shaziryu quickly noticed Kasha and I as we walked towards them. Brother, it's a rare sight to see you in the village, rarer still to see one that isn't a lizard man. What's the occasion? Shaziryu enthusiastically asked. Kasha and I sat down and joined the group before answering. Even now, I noticed the looks of disapproval that the elders gave me. They disliked how, even with my status as a traveler, I held great sway over my brother. Add to that their preference for isolationism, and they must be seething at what they perceived to be me flaunting my political power. My friend here is actually the reason, Shaziryu. This is Kasha Blanc, a sorceress who had an interesting proposal that needed to be brought to your attention. Trust me when I say that you shouldn't treat this offer lightly. I explained as respectfully as I could. Shaziryu and the elders turned their attention to Kasha with curiosity. It's rare for one to garner my brother's attention so easily. And, while you look human, your tails and ears say otherwise. You're right, I'm not human. I am a kitsune from a far-off land, and from what your brother has told me, my kind are completely unknown here. Kasha answered with an inviting smile. Or she could be a human disguising herself with illusionary magic to allay our suspicions. For all we know, she could be a spy from the Dragon Claw or the Red Eye who'll inform them about our strengths and weaknesses. The elder, Korkoris, stated with paranoia. I didn't feel comfortable with the unchanging smile on Kasha's face or the way that her eyes lacked the amusement they usually contained. What really confirmed her mood was her tails. The fur on them, normally smooth like silk, was beginning to bristle. I'll assure you, this body is very much real. I hope that you'll refrain from insulting me when I'm being quite civil. To make a point, one of her tails snaked forwards until it rested on Corcora's lap. Don't attempt to frighten me, girl. You stand in the center of our tribe, and any hostile action you attempt will be answered with your swift end. Corcoris was always more conflict-prone than the other elders or my brother. She'd been a fighter his entire life, and that translated to most of her advice being filled with paranoia and warmongering. I couldn't stand the elder lizard man, but she did have moments where her wisdom was the most appropriate. If you must refer to me by anything other than my name, then call me lady. I'm no girl. And secondly, if I wanted you dead, your village would be a crater in the ground, and that is by far the most boring method that I could perform to kill everyone here, Kasha stated proudly as her tail slid off Corcoris' lap. Trust what she says. I've seen what she can do firsthand, and if she wanted us dead, it wouldn't be an issue for her to end us like she says, not a single issue for a goddess like her to do so. I decided to reveal her divinity to them immediately, and hopefully Kasha would confirm my statement. The elders were wide-eyed as I said this, while my brother kept an unemotional expression, yet his eyes couldn't hide the incredulity that they contained. You must be joking. Shaziryu, are you really going to listen to your brother blather on about this stranger that he proclaims a goddess? It's absolute lunacy. Corcoris barked out with a scowl made worse by the numerous scars across her face. Even I would be hard-pressed to believe such claims. While I might be open to the idea, there isn't any proof of your claims, Traveler Zarasu. Even then, why would a goddess even decide to aid us? The other elder, Callio, said with a calm tone. He was one of the calmer of the elders, though anyone might seem calm when compared to Corcoris. The issue I had with him was how much of a stickler he was with tradition and preferred stagnancy to change. My brother remained silent as the elders voiced their opinions. Likely because he wished to remain neutral in the discussion and avoid showing me favoritism. You're right, elder. Why would any of you believe that I have any form of divinity when you've only just met me, an outsider to your ways and customs? If I was a fraud, I'd attempt to convince you with words and tricks about my truthfulness. Luckily for you, I'm not a fraud, and I plan to give you proof. She stood back onto her feet, which made an audible and ominous clack on the floor due to her strangely designed footwear. If you'd like to stand, I will be teleporting us outside the village to avoid collateral damage. As she said this, I was the first to stand while the others continued to remain seated. After a few tense moments when I thought that Kasha might unwillingly teleport the elders and Shaziryu, it was said brother who broke his neutrality and stood. To Corcoris' chagrin, Callio stood with his chief, leaving the cantankerous elder being the only one remaining seated. You would put your trust in a stranger and a traveler to not teleport us into a hostile environment? How can you be so foolish? If it's your will to not teleport, then I won't force you. But, if you wish to still see my display, you can walk outside the village gate that is guarded by Farquick. Greater teleportation. Kasha announced as that familiar stretching feeling washed over my body and the world blurred until all of us, besides Corcoris, arrived atop flooded ground that allowed us all to overlook the lake. That gave me such a headache, Shaziryu muttered as he began to look around at our surroundings. Behind us, the village was a few hundred meters away. Easily in walking distance, and close enough that any tribe member near the gate could see whatever miracle that Kasha planned to perform. Hope that your headache doesn't impair your eyesight because you're about to witness my first trick. Creation. Kasha clapped her hands together before extending them out before her as mystical circles formed of pure mana grew around her. For a few moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then, in the deeper waters of the lake about 100 meters away, the waters began bubbling and churning like a maelstrom. What is she doing? Callio asked while his focus stayed on the churning water ahead. She is changing the very landscape itself. I answered while continuing to watch. If it was anything like the lake she'd created earlier, then it would be something of a grand scale. Changing the very land? Shaziryu said in disbelief. The churning finally stopped and left the waters of the lake abnormally calm. Then, the true display of her spell began. The calm of the water broke as a structure of granite broke through it and created large waves which rippled across the lake. This didn't stop as the structure continued rising like a twisting tree of stone being pulled up by a massive invisible hand. This is incredible," Shaziryu remarked in awe as the stone tree continued growing. Sections of the tree grew off from the main pillar to form branches, and on these branches grew plants and trees. Yet, it wasn't just the branches of this stone tree that became covered in life as vines and such began spreading along the main pillar. Strangest of all was the waterfalls that spewed forth from the tips of each of these branches and drained back into the lake below. When she had finished with growing the tree, it stood like a mountain above the trees of the forest. Yet, this wasn't all, as the base of the tree began expanding until the base was double the width of the rest of the tree's pillar. Finally, a bridge of granite grew across the water until it reached our location. Pillars expanded beneath the bridge and into the water to provide support while plant life grew upon it in the form of vines and grass. When Kasha concluded her display, she turned towards us once more with a cocky grin upon her face. "I hope you all like my newest art piece. I call it the Tree of Gods," she stated with a bow, though I highly doubted that Shaziryu or Kaleo noticed as their focus was on the massive structure that had just been spawned in the middle of the lake. "Would you like a tour of the tree? I made certain to create pathways within it so that you could traverse it if need be." The second time that Kasha spoke, the shocked pair finally took notice of her speaking and paid attention. "What power! I've lived to see much displays of magic throughout my time, but I never could have imagined creating a structure of this size alone would be in the realm of the 13 heroes. Yet, to do both that and create life along with it, what are you?" Kaleo asked with a hint of fear in his voice. "I have been completely truthful since I first arrived. I have come to offer you and your tribe a deal that would benefit you and all future generations of your tribe if you were to accept. My name is Kasha Blanc, one of only 21 kitsune who gained their 9th tail, a traveler of distant realms, the last walking incarnation of disaster, chosen disciple of 2 deities, leader of a village of all races and mistress of the mystic arts. My name is Kasha Blanc and I am the daughter of the goddess Inori." While announcing her identity, her voice started to echo while other voices overlapped it, some men, some women, yet Kasha's voice remained dominant above them. The orange of her eyes glowed like an inferno while her slitted pupils seemed to stare into not just my soul, but the souls of my brother and Kaleo. Her presence had also changed. Whereas before she felt sociable and reachable, now she radiated pure power which I never could believe myself to attain even in my furthest dreams. It was commanding enough that I almost fell to my knees to bow before her. My brother was probably feeling Kasha's presence even worse due to being unprepared, yet he showed his willpower by still standing even with this pervading aura of Kasha's filling the area. The same couldn't be said for the elder, Kaleo, as he fell to his knees with his head bowed down and I avoiding contact with Kasha's form. "Lady Kasha, we don't need any further proof of your divinity. The elders will be gathered immediately to listen to your offer if you're still willing to speak to us," Shaziryu said in a tense and respectful tone. I couldn't imagine the effort Shaziryu had to exert to remain standing while also holding a calm conversation with the goddess. Upon hearing my brother say this, the overwhelming presence of Kasha's finally died down and the glow in her eyes faded back to their normal orange. She smiled as she said, "I'm glad that we could finally reach an understanding, Shaziryu. Shall I teleport us back or would you like to walk?" "Walking would be fine. I'm still feeling a headache from you teleporting us earlier," Shaziryu calmly answered. It was clear to see that he was nervous around Kasha, which would mean that he'd be more cautious around the kitsune. I didn't blame him for his fear. Even though I knew that she is here with benevolent intentions in mind, her ridiculous power still terrified me. My solace was that she was at least the tribe's ally rather than its enemy. Time seemed to move at a snail's pace as I sat with Kasha in the longhouse. After the display of her power, we rushed back to the village to gather the other elders. Currently, besides us, Korkorus and Callio sat with us in the longhouse waiting while my brother ran off to gather the remaining 4 elders. Even though our meeting's content was meant to be hidden from the village, it was hard to hide the massive stone construct that Kasha had raised from the depths of the lake. Periodically checking outside the longhouse, I had spotted members of the tribe gathering near the front gate to investigate the Tree of Gods. Some braver tribesmen were even moving closer to it. Speaking of strange behavior, Callio hadn't been the same since he got back. When we walked back to the village, Callio had been looking at Kasha with the reverence of a fanatic that was concerning. Korkorus, on the other hand, had been in an even fouler mood since she decided to look at Kasha's creation. I didn't know what thoughts might be passing through Korkorus' head, but I doubted that any of them were friendly. It'd be more than likely that the old warhawk was thinking up methods on how to possibly kill Kasha. None of these concerns were voiced to Kasha, as I feared what she may do, especially I didn't want our discussions to be soured by paranoia. There was already enough of that going around to last a lifetime. Just when I thought this growing tension would reach a head, my brother finally arrived with the other elders. Each of them took a seat in front of Kasha, with Shazharyu being the last to sit. "Lady Kasha, I've brought all the remaining elders to listen to your offer. We are ready to hear you. Thanks for being so open to hear me. For those of you who have just arrived, my name is Kasha Blanc, daughter of the goddess Inori. I have come to your tribe today to offer you a place in the town that I've been creating. From what I've been told, the location of your tribe has not aided in sustaining your people or allowing you to prosper. In fact, I know that all of you have been suffering constant famines that have impacted not just your tribe but all others inhabiting the lake. How do you possibly have enough space to house and sustain our tribe of 343 members? Even beyond available space, how do you expect to transport all of us safely through the great forest without any accidents or hardships?" The elder, Dranyus, interrogated. "I have a spell that could transport all of your people instantly to my village, which mitigates the hazards of traveling. And, no doubt you've already seen the massive stone construct I made outside your village. Using the same spell that I used to create the construct, I also created a massive lake which Zarasu personally saw. It has more than enough space to fit your entire tribe without any of you needing to worry about resources. I can even demonstrate why that is if one of you were to give me a fish as an example." A few of the elders began muttering amongst themselves while Shazharyu walked to a basket in the corner of the room that contained some salted fish. While the salt helped preserve the fish, it was a limited commodity that was difficult to come by. After collecting a single fish, my brother walked over to Kasha and handed her test example. "Thank you," she said as she took the fish. "Permanise magic, enlarge." All of us witnessed as the fish, a measly 6 inches in length that would be barely enough to feed an adult let alone a child, suddenly grew until it was 4 feet long. When she was done, she set the fish down in front of herself and the group of confused elders. Under normal circumstances, a being or object hit with the enlarge spell would only last a few minutes at best. Due to my metamagic, this spell will never end unless I wish it to. Worrying about famine in a short time frame will no longer be an issue for your tribe. And, due to Zarasu's fishery idea, making a sustainable fish population to feed your tribe in the long run is completely possible. The moment Kasha mentioned my name, I felt all the eyes of the elders on me. I didn't exactly like the attention, especially since I knew that Kasha was already aware of fisheries, and yet she was trying to pass it all off as my idea. What could she be playing at? Aside from Kasha bringing attention to me, I couldn't help but be amazed at this feat of meta-magic that I'd never seen before. To permanently enchant an object with a spell seemed absolutely incredible and useful. No doubt, the elders and Shazharyu felt the same way watching the goddess perform miracle after miracle. "By all accounts, everything you are promising us seems too good to be true." Elder Xerus spoke up. "Why is it that you come to our simple tribe with offers and displays that seem to benefit us more than it does you? When I came to the great forest of Tob earlier today, I wished to only end the threat that the troll known as Gu was bringing to the south. Afterwards, I came to the lake to simply enjoy the waters until I encountered Zarasu. The oldest of the elders, Ilias, took this moment to interrupt Kasha when he asked, "Are you saying that you killed one of the 3 great monsters that ruled a section of Tob? I heard that the 3 were unbeatable." I did indeed kill Gu. Though I offered him the chance to cease his activities that were bringing conflict to the south. He rudely declined with his club, which is when I killed him. Afterwards, I offered all of those that followed him the opportunity to leave the area or to join my village. Kasha answered, impressing both Ilias and a few of the other elders who muttered among themselves. Regardless of my prior feats, Zarisu and I conversed for some time, and I learned of all the troubles that not just your tribe, but all lizardmen tribes inhabiting this lake faced. I've been to places suffering similar troubles to yours when I lacked the power to do something. Now that I have the power to help you over the same problems I see here, I see it as my duty to do so. Kasha replied in a respectful tone. In the village that I've been developing, I've recently created an entire lake which I populated with fish, along with space around this lake to settle and make as a home. In my village, you'd be a part of a greater collective that accepts all races into its folds, and no longer would your tribe need to worry about competing for resources. If you wished it, I could even transport us to the village so that you may see my claims with your own eyes. Elder Xerus was the first to ask, Lady Kasha, if the Greenclaw tribe were to join this village of yours, what rights would we have? Would we even have autonomy, or would we have to follow your every order? Based on the answer that Kasha gave, this could be a deal-breaker to a few of the elders. Especially ones like Korkorus. That is a fair question. Within my village, you'd have autonomy to live where you wish and a chief to continue leading you. This chief would answer to me when called, but besides the few things that I may ask of your tribe, you'd be free to govern yourselves however you wished. The only things that I would ask is that you would not kill, steal, or harm the other citizens of the village. If any of you would like to leave the village, you would be free to do so at any time. I'd even help relocate anyone if they wished it. These terms of yours sound fair to be sure, Shaziryu announced, ceasing all the hushed conversations between the elders, yet it would be unwise to make this decision hastily, especially when something of this importance will affect not just us, but all members of the tribe. I ask that you allow the Green Claw at least a week to discuss your offer amongst ourselves before we give you our answer. Would you be willing to accept this? Attention filled the room as we all waited for Kasha's answer. Even though I doubted that Kasha would perform any malicious actions against us for asking this small boon, the rest of the elders and possibly my brother didn't know this. The instant that Kasha nodded in agreement, I heard sighs of relief escape from a few of the elders as that seemed to have been holding their breaths in wait. If a week to deliberate is what you want, then I will honor your wishes. Answering an offer of this importance shouldn't be decided lightly. The goddess then started reaching to open space, at least until a black void swallowed her hand. Upon finally pulling her hand out of the void, she brought from it a scroll which I had no doubt was magical in nature. One of her tails then removed the scroll from her hand and stretched forwards to Shaziryu until the object was deposited in my brother's lap. Gingerly picking up the scroll, my brother was about to roll it open when Kasha's tail stopped him. That is a message scroll with a one-time use. If you wish to contact me any time earlier within the week, then open the scroll and speak your message. I will arrive shortly after to meet you in this very building and we can talk. Additionally, in 7 days I'll arrive in this building at noon in case we haven't come to an agreement earlier in the week. The eyes of the elders all focused on the small object that could, in essence, summon a goddess to speak to us. It was a bit amusing to consider that a relatively simple magical object powered by one of the simpler second-tier spells could make an effect that trumped the spell. Yet, even with all this proof, some of the elders were still in doubt. But there was one possibility that could help sway their opinions and allow me to fulfill my duty as a traveler of the Green Claw. Lady Kasha, if you would allow me, I'd like to accompany you to your village as a temporary ambassador to gather information and aid in the cultural relations of the inhabitants of your village and the Green Claw. Zarisu, are you certain that this is what you wish? Shaziryu asked with concern. I couldn't help but smile at the way my brother was attempting to protect me from the potential threat of a goddess. Brother, I'm a traveler of the Green Claw. My duty is to travel beyond the tribe in the pursuit of knowledge to strengthen us. Learning about Kasha's village is one of the reasons for why I'm a traveler, I stated proudly. Even with the scorn and disdain that the tribe gave me at times, I couldn't simply ignore my duty. Would you allow this, Lady Kasha? Of course, Zarasu. If you were to wish it, I could even give you message scrolls to report back to the Green Claw each day, and I'll return you back home at the end of the week safe and sound. I couldn't help but feel elated at Kasha's enthusiastic reply. Our tribe needed all the assistance that it could receive, and should all turn out well, it could be possible to get the other tribes of lizardmen to join Kasha's village. While there were members of the Green Claw that preferred staying isolated from the rest of the tribes, I believed that joining together would make us stronger than staying separate. It's just that the idea had been a far-off dream due to the shortages of food. Now, uniting the tribes was in the realm of possibility. Thank you. You're welcome. The goddess answered warmly. Aside from my offer to the Green Claw, I'm also gifting you the Tree of Gods that I created for taking the time to hear me. Make of it what you will. We're honored to be given such a gift, Lady Kasha. If this is all, then I believe that this meeting is concluded. Shaziryu finished. With the meeting concluded, the elders quickly started to stream out of the hut until only Kasha, Shaziryu, and I remained. If you wish, I'd be honored to host a dinner for you and Shaziryu in my home. And I feel honored to receive such a prestigious invitation. Unfortunately, there are matters that I must take care of today that can't be ignored. Perhaps another night when all of us are less burdened by our duties. That silver tongue hers dodged the invitation gracefully, completely opposite of how I've seen her acting before. And these duties that Kasha spoke of made me wonder tasks required the might of a goddess. Perhaps I might find out later when we arrived at her village. I'll hold you to that promise in the future, Shaziryu said with a laugh. Before you leave with my brother, could I speak to him privately for a moment? Kasha agreed and swiftly exited the longhouse, leaving just my brother and I remaining. Little brother, I have no idea where you found that woman, but you certainly broke the horse's back with the friend that you've made. I couldn't exactly say that we are friends right now, we've only just met one another, yet she's shown more sympathy to our plight than any other that I've encountered in my travels. I believe that it's possible for me to befriend her considering how accepting she is. I answered truthfully. Not even the possibility that the kitsune could hear our conversation with those ears of hers made me waver in my belief. Hopefully your relationship can continue positively growing. Even if we could only get her as an ally if we decline her proposal, it would still give us a massive defense if outsiders or the other tribes were to attack us. Shaziryu placed his hand on my shoulder while his face became grim and serious, but I'm disappointed in you for one reason. This made me worried. How could I give my brother any cause for concern? I'm disappointed that while you managed to gain the attention of a living goddess, you still are unable to find a mate. He then broke out into boisterous laughter while my heart stopped pumping as fast as before. Really? You're still bothering me about my love life? You're supposed to be the more mature older brother. He quickly pulled me into a hug and patted me on the back before separating. You're my little brother. It's my job to look out for you, and if necessary, tease you about anything and everything. Besides, it can be painful to be married at times. It's unfair that you aren't suffering like I am. Ever since Shaziryu had mated with his wife, he'd been constantly trying to get me to pair off with someone. It would no doubt get worse whenever his wife became pregnant. Whatever. I answered while rolling my eyes. While I'm gone, could you take care of the fishery and avoid eating any of the fish before I get back? I'll try my best, Zarasu, but I don't know how much longer my will can hold out. They just look so plump and delicious. Even now, he was salivating at the thought of eating them while his tail was wagging in excitement. You managed to hold your will against that of a goddess earlier today. How could a couple of fish break what I goddess couldn't? You made them look too delicious, little brother. Fish aside, I want you to be careful and stay safe while at Kasha's village. If something were to happen to you, I doubt that I'd be able to function without a little brother to dote over and tease. Don't worry, I'll send you a report every night while I'm gone to let you know I'm safe, and each message will have the word for this symbol at the start or end. I used my claw to scratch a crude symbol of a fish into the uncarpeted wooden floor. If Kasha swore upon my safety, then nothing will happen to me while I'm in her village. She doesn't seem like the kind of person that would break a promise. What I didn't say aloud was belief that she did seem the type to twist her promises if she wanted to. I pray that you're correct. Will you be taking Rororo with you, or shall I look after him? I didn't even consider leaving Rororo behind, as it would be wise to have a known ally in unfamiliar territory. That, and he could become very depressed if separated from me for long. Hopefully the food that I'd left for him in the shack would occupy him until I got back. He'll keep me company at Kasha's village. I think that you'll have more than enough responsibilities of caring for my fish without eating them without a hydra to add to it. He nodded with a smirk. Good luck, little brother. I'll see you in a week's time. Each of us stood up as our conversation concluded and exited the longhouse where Kasha was waiting at the bottom of the steps for us. Conversation go well? She asked. Certainly did. Just had to tease my brother before I let him go traveling again. As we met Kasha at the bottom of the steps, Shaziryu took on the chief persona once more and said, I hope that regardless of what we decide, our peoples can build a strong relationship with one another. As he said this, he held his hand out to Kasha. It was good to see that Kasha shook my brother's hand, as it showed that she didn't hold any type of disdain to those weaker than her. I'm certain that we will come to an understanding eventually. No matter your choice, I promise that I will still be willing to aid your people even if you aren't part of my village. The two leaders then pulled their hands away and I moved over to Kasha's side. Before we head to your village, I wanted to head back to my shack to bring my Hydra Rororo with us. I announced before Kasha could teleport us. A Hydra? No wonder your shack seemed like it had been doused in liquid Hydra. You keep surprising me more and more. I certainly like that in my friends. She finished with a cheeky grin.